with us, have you?
No, I haven't.
And I'm not sure we have ever met. Maybe across a room or something.
One time along.
Lee Van Cleef and Clint Eastwood became two of the most unforgettable faces in Western cinema. On screen, they looked like rivals. One became the legendary hero audiences cheered for, while the other mastered the cold stare of a man you never fully trusted. But years before his death, Lee Van Cleef finally revealed what he truly thought about Clint Eastwood, and the truth was far different from the rivalry fans imagined. Before Hollywood ever knew his name, Lee Van Cleef was already fighting real battles. Born Clarence Leroy Van Cleef Jr. on January 9, 1925, in New Jersey, he left school at just 17 years old to join the U.S. Navy during World War II. He served aboard submarine hunters and minesweepers, taking part in dangerous missions across the Atlantic and Mediterranean. One of the most intense moments came during the Allied invasion of southern France in 1944. His ship, the USS Incredible, was attacked by German human torpedoes, manned underwater explosives designed to destroy Allied vessels. Van Cleef and his crew fought back in complete chaos, destroying most of the incoming attackers before two detonated against the ship. The Incredible survived, and Van Cleef earned the Bronze Star for bravery under fire. Long before he played tough men on screen, he had already lived through war. After returning home, Van Cleef struggled to find direction. He worked odd jobs during the day and took accounting work at night just to survive. Acting wasn't part of some grand dream. It started almost by accident after a friend convinced him to join a small theater group in the late 1940s. That decision changed everything. In 1952, he landed a small role in High Noon alongside Gary Cooper. He barely had any dialogue, but audiences noticed him instantly. Tall, lean, sharp-faced, and carrying an intimidating stare, Van Cleef had a screen presence that didn't need words. Even standing silently with a harmonica, he commanded attention. Hollywood quickly decided what he was meant to be: the villain. Throughout the 1950s and early 1960s, Van Cleef became one of the most recognizable bad guys in westerns. He appeared in films like Gunfight at the OK Corral and The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, often playing outlaws or gang members. Directors loved his face because it naturally carried danger and suspicion. But there was a problem. The roles rarely improved. The pay stayed low. Hollywood kept using him the same way over and over again. Some insiders even suggested he change his appearance if he wanted leading roles. They wanted him to fix his nose and soften his features. Van Cleef refused. Eventually, frustrated and exhausted, he walked away from acting completely. He started an interior decorating business to support his family. Then things became even worse after a devastating car accident in 1958 left him with chronic pain and nearly ended his life. By the early 1960s, his acting career looked finished. Then came the moment that changed everything. One day, Van Cleef received a call asking him to meet at a hotel. Thinking it was related to decorating work, he arrived carrying a measuring tape. Instead, waiting for him was Italian director Sergio Leone. Leone had watched Van Cleef's old films overseas and saw something Hollywood no longer valued. He didn't see just another background villain. He saw intensity, silence, and a face audiences could never forget. Leone cast him as Colonel Mortimer in for a few dollars more alongside a young actor named Clint Eastwood. At the time, Eastwood was still relatively unknown. A fistful of dollars had started building momentum, but nobody yet understood how massive Clint Eastwood would eventually become. Van Cleef later admitted the offer felt unreal. Leone's team even handed him $10,000 in cash upfront, more money than he had seen in years. He rushed home, tossed the envelope toward his wife Joan, and when the rubber band snapped, cash exploded across the floor. She laughed, cried, and counted the money 4 separate times because it didn't feel real. 2 days later, Van Cleef was flying to Italy. For a few dollars more transformed his career overnight. As Colonel Mortimer, Van Cleef played a quiet bounty hunter carrying deep personal pain beneath a calm exterior. He didn't need dramatic speeches. Every glance and movement carried weight. Audiences loved him. The film became a massive success, helping launch the spaghetti western revolution and turning both Van Cleef and Eastwood into international stars. Then came the good, the bad and the ugly. This time, Van Cleef played Angel Eyes, one of the coldest villains in Western history. Dirty, ruthless, and emotionally empty, Angel Eyes became unforgettable because Van Cleef understood how to make silence terrifying. Yet despite playing brutal characters, Van Cleef had strict personal rules. He refused to threaten children, kill animals, or murder women on screen. No matter how dark the role became, those were lines he would not cross. While Clint Eastwood returned to Hollywood and became a mainstream superstar, Van Cleef stayed in Italy, where he was finally treated like a leading man instead of a background villain. European audiences appreciated exactly what Hollywood once overlooked. By the 1970s, he was headlining westerns himself, including the Magnificent Seven ride, where he brought a harder, older edge to the legendary gunslinger role. Later, he appeared in John Carpenter's Escape from New York opposite Kurt Russell, proving his screen presence still carried enormous power even outside westerns. Off-screen, though, Lee Van Cleef was nothing like the dangerous man he portrayed. According to his family, he was calm, warm, and surprisingly easygoing. He enjoyed painting portraits and figure art during his later years and found peace away from Hollywood. The same man who terrified audiences on screen was often described at home as quiet and gentle. Then, in December 1989, Lee Van Cleef passed away at the age of 64 after suffering heart complications. On his gravestone, the inscription simply reads, "The best of the bad." But years before his death, Van Cleef finally addressed the one subject fans constantly speculated about: Clint Eastwood. For decades, many assumed there had to be jealousy between them. Eastwood became one of the biggest stars in Hollywood history, while Van Cleef remained more mysterious and understated. But Van Cleef never saw it that way. In interviews during the final years of his life, he spoke about Eastwood with enormous respect. According to Van Cleef, people misunderstood their relationship because audiences always wanted rivalry stories. In reality, he believed they simply brought different energies to the screen. Van Cleef openly admitted Eastwood had something special from the very beginning. He said Clint understood the power of restraint better than almost anyone. While other actors tried to dominate scenes with loud dialogue or dramatic movement, Eastwood slowed everything down. He stayed calm, silent, and controlled, and somehow that made audiences focus on him even more. Van Cleef believed that kind of presence couldn't be taught. He also recognized how carefully Eastwood protected his image. Every pause, every stare, every moment of silence was deliberate. Clint understood that his calm, mysterious persona was becoming larger than the films themselves. But Van Cleef never felt overshadowed by that success. Instead, he accepted that audiences saw them differently. Eastwood naturally fit the image of the heroic Western icon. Van Cleef represented something darker: danger, suspicion, and moral uncertainty. And he embraced that completely. Rather than fighting to become the hero, Van Cleef turned his unique appearance into his greatest strength. He understood he didn't need audiences to trust him. He only needed them to remember him. That's exactly what happened. Van Cleef later explained that the contrast between his darker characters and Eastwood's controlled heroes helped make those Sergio Leone films unforgettable. Without that tension, the magic wouldn't have worked the same way. He also praised Eastwood's professionalism behind the scenes, saying Clint always came prepared, respected the craft, and treated filmmaking seriously. Most importantly, Van Cleef understood something many actors never do: not every legacy has to look the same. Eastwood became a giant movie star, director, and cultural icon. Van Cleef became something quieter but equally unforgettable, the face audiences instantly associated with danger, silence, and intensity. And he was perfectly at peace with that. In the end, there was no hidden bitterness between them. No secret feud. No resentment. Just two completely different men who helped redefine the Western genre together. One stood in the light. The other thrived in the shadows. And together, Lee Van Cleef and Clint Eastwood created one of the greatest partnerships Western cinema has ever seen. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like this video, subscribe to Prestige Buzz, and turn on the bell notification, and never miss another deep dive into Hollywood legends, forgotten icons, and the untold stories behind the stars.